Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone, wherever you are. You see my background here. I'm in Vietnam. My name is John Kyo. I'm professor of practice at McGill University. Our webinar today, we have some fantastic guests I'll go through in just a moment, but we're going to be talking about improving food safety with trusted knowledge exchange and AI. And I'll give you the format just after I introduce the speakers briefly. We have Manos Karvounis from Agrino in Greece. Welcome, Manos. Diana Sabrain from OneAgrix. And Diana, you're currently in Switzerland, I believe. And we have our good friend Branimir Rakic from Trace Labs. So from a format perspective, I'm going to talk about for 5 or 6 minutes on just setting the scene of the challenges and complexities in food chains. After I talk, I'm going to pass over to Manos, who'll show a few slides, and he'll look at it through the lens from Agrino. Then we'll pass over to Branimir, and he'll take a Trace Labs, a technical view at knowledge graphs and what the work that they're doing currently. And then we'll pass to Diana, and Diana's going to talk about the lens through her business, OneAgrix, and what it means for the halal market. So with that in mind, let me just show you my screens, my screenshot here. And I want to go through these slides, as I mentioned, just to set the scene. Some of you may have seen me present these before. Well, the food chain is extraordinarily complex. This is just a simplification of what's going on out there. But as you start to build these pictures from the food that's on the right-hand side there, you try to figure out, well, what kind of fish species is this? Is it wild or farmed salmon? If you've paid 30% more for it, are you getting value for money, or are you being cheated? How do we verify these things? Is my milk being diluted or adulterated? Is this animal feed safe? So there's a lot of questions that come up when we're looking at the complexity of global supply chains. Because if you're a buyer in, let's say you're in Brussels and you're buying from all over the world, the actions and behaviors of all of the people involved in the supply chain are what's considered unobservable. So how can we use technologies and science to be able to verify if a food product is actually organic or if there was a heavy metal contamination in it? And I won't go through all of these, but is this claim of 100% beef correct? We know what happened with this, what we had something called blind trust in the food safety in Europe a number of years ago, but we know what happened with the horse meat scandal. And down here on the left, can I verify there's no pork in my halal foods? So lots of complexities out there, lots of different technologies out there as well, likely thousands of different technologies, many, many different languages, different regulatory frameworks and different standards that all work to bring products to market. But we're missing something. We're missing that interoperability between all of these technologies. And this is where standards help us, W3C, GS1 standards, and others. But something that I want to talk about later, I'll ask some questions to the panel, is around the services that are behind these supply chains. We often talk about, or we talk maybe too often, about the physical product and its journey through the market. And if we have to recall that product, we only talk about the product itself, getting it off the market. But research work that was done in 2015 by APEC, that's Asia Pacific Economic Cooperation, there's 21 economies in there, including Canada, US, Mexico, Australia, China, and so on. They looked at the services involved in the food chain, and they looked at 2 products in Chile. They looked at the wine industry and they looked at fresh cherries. The wine industry needed 70 different services to bring a single ingredient product to the market, and cherries was 88. Now, of those 70 different services, 21 were done in-house, 21 were semi-outsourced, and 29 were fully outsourced. And the work that's fully outsourced are different service providers that come to the farm to do something, whether it's an agronomist or some other activity. But how do we know if those companies are certified? How do we know their staff are qualified? How do we know they did the right treatment if they were putting pesticides or herbicides on the farm? So a lot of questions come up, and this is where I want to ask the panel today, how can technology help us with the credentialing behind these firms and these people that touch food before it gets to the market. And also later, I'm going to talk about, this is the overview from the European Food Safety Authority, and they look at the outbreaks, foodborne disease outbreaks in Europe. This is from the period 2016 to 2021. You can see here astronomical numbers, 29,343 outbreaks, 257,813 individual cases. That means humans that got sick, 22,038 hospitalizations, and 230 deaths. So that number of outbreaks there, this is only within the EU, that's 4,890 per year. It's 94 a week, and it's 13 every single day. So I'm going to want to know from the panel, how can we fix a lot of these things that are out there? How can we get technologies out into the field and deployed so farmers in far off different countries can use their well-earned credential, use the technology to put that credential onto a platform and have it trusted by someone around the world. So with that, I'm going to go to our first speaker, Manos, and I'm going to unshare here. And Manos is going to take some of what I talked about, but he's going to take his own angle here and talk about what's important for them at Agruno and how they see the world. So Manos, over to you.
Thanks a lot, John. Let me share my screen, see if everything works on the tech side before we tackle more difficult issues today. Is it okay? So
Yes.
See that? All right, great, thanks. All right, thanks a lot, John. So, provocative title here and only 5 minutes to talk about it. Can we predict food safety incidents before they happen? And how can this fit into what John talked about for improving food safety and maybe reducing product recalls that hit the market? So let's see. The first thing I do when I give this speech in a live audience is to vote without any qualifications, without any definitions. We can't vote now, but let's everybody think for themselves. Can we really predict food safety incidents before they happen? Let's see what we feel. Let's give us 10 seconds for that. All right. Well, the first thing I think we will understand when we try to answer this for ourselves is that everybody intuitively thinks about different definitions, about what predictions means. And there are great questions out there that artificial intelligence and forecasting can answer, but many of them are not ready to be answered. For many of them, we don't have sufficient data. But there are very interesting questions that we can answer right now. Agruno is trying to spearhead this process also in the commercial landscape. So the first one, a very concrete question we can answer in the greater context of forecasting and predictions is, okay, our lab testing plan for next year. I use our HACCP analysis and expert opinions for that. Can I do better? We can also give this in from the point of view of the certificator, of the inspector, or the auditor. I want to inspect a particular company. I know their historical incidents, but what should I be careful about? What are some particular hazards that might not have happened in the past that maybe I need to take into account this time? So this turns into a rather concrete question, which is, given a particular ingredient on a particular hazard, do we expect an increase or a decrease in food safety incidents in the next 12 months? So this is a question that can be approached, okay, through artificial intelligence, and the data many times is there to answer it. So let's see a couple of approaches for how we can tackle such a question. The first one, okay. The first approach, I call it use the same. What does that mean? Let's talk about the particular hazards. Let's talk about Listeria. And let's think about an ideal world out there where, chicken is spherical and things like that, where Listeria incidents over time are characterized by this very simple time series, okay, which is very seasonal, very periodic. And if I ask you how is this going to evolve in the next 12 months, you would all know that it's going to be something like as it was before. So that's a very basic approach. what we can do through artificial intelligence and with enough data, and we have data about recalls for listeria and other hazards spanning more than a decade or two, we can see how its shape is, how it evolves, and artificial intelligence and machine learning algorithms can help us project in the future how the incidents are going to evolve based only on the shape of the time series. So here you can see a live demonstration of how we have predicted, this is the red line, the listeria incidents to evolve in the next 12 months. Given what we know, and this is the black line, and it spreads a bit over a decade before, as I said, we have part of it here, of how it was in the past. So that's a basic approach, but I understand that maybe this is not very satisfactory, right? So what are we taking into account? We're taking into account only the shape of the historical incidents, and that's interesting. And many times, due to the seasonality of the hazards, this is something that's pretty accurate. In other cases, and this is something we're going to explore in the future as well, we can use multiple factors. So factors that play a role in the final time series, in the listeria incidents in this example. So what plays a role? For example, the average precipitation of the average humidity and how it evolves through time for a particular place. This might affect cases of listeriosis. This is the disease you get from listeria. And just to give you a very simple example, maybe the average employment of an area and how it affects how careful food processors can be when they do their processing. This also affects the listeria incident. So by taking all these accounts, all these factors into account, we can have a more accurate prediction of the final shape, the final projected future time series of any hazard we are tackling. So both of these things are very interesting for AgroKnow. It is something that we're working on both research-wise, in a project we will talk about today, the food safety market, but also another project, EFRA, that is starting right now, and it is something that we're also trying to spearhead to commercialize. Now, let me say a couple of things for our food safety market project, and also tie it a bit to what Branimir is going to talk about. So what are we trying to do with this project? This is a European project. It involves lots of partners. It's us, it's OriginTrail, and lots of others. Let me say very quickly, the FSN can be thought, as a colleague of mine said recently, as a pipeline, okay? As a technical pipeline. So an interesting example here is this. So at one place on the right, maybe we have a particular certification body like Ecosyster, which are our partners in this project as well. And let's say they have a particular client and they want to run a certification process for them. Right now, what they need to do is contact the client, get all the relevant documents. Some of them are physical copies, other are digital files, spread all over, send emails, do all that. That's a bit tough, and we all know about it. But maybe the client is already using some digital tools like FoodAkai or Agrivi, or some of this information is already into some of the laboratories that the client is using for their certificates or the certificates of analysis or their lab tests. What the FSM is offering is a way to connect these disparate systems, okay? So you have an API gateway that you can very easily connect your particular application to. You have access control, encryption, and all other security measures offered by our platform. And at the end, let's say you have a particular certificate of analysis that is issued by a laboratory. Instead of storing it internally and creating a silo inside your laboratory, you can use the FSM to upload it into the Decentralized knowledge graph. From there, any actor, like Ecosyster, that would like access to it, can have access to it through the FSM platform and all the provisions for security, encryption, and access control provided by the project. That's all from me, and I think this is potentially a good time for Branimir to pitch in for the Decentralized knowledge graph as well.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Imanos, for that. It certainly aligns quite nicely with the some of the challenges that I see in the global marketplace, certainly around certifications and food safety, and also predicting food fraud. So we will come back to that, but I just want to remind everyone again, or actually say for the first time, I didn't say it earlier, that there is a Q&A box. So if you do have questions, please put them into the Q&A box, and we will get to those later in the conversation. We'll have lots of time, hopefully, for that. So without further ado, let me pass over to Branimir.
Thanks, John, and thanks, Manos, for this great introduction and presenting the FSM project. As probably most people know me, but if you don't know me, I'm Branimir. I'm one of the CTO and one of the founders of Trace Labs, the core developers of OriginTrail Decentralized Knowledge Graph, which Manos just mentioned. And I'll give a brief intro into what that is and how it relates to food safety, I hope in 5 minutes. So let me just quickly share my screen. Please let me know when you guys see it.
Yes.
Awesome. So I have a few slides to show, but briefly just to introduce what we do and what this whole decentralized knowledge graph is about. Essentially, it's about organizing humanity's assets, any assets, including foods, ingredients, and pretty much anything you can think of that you can consider an asset, and making it discoverable, verifiable, and then adding obviously value to it. How does it work? What is it? Well, it is a decentralized knowledge graph, and this means it's kind of an interesting combination of technologies. If you never heard of such a term before, I'll try to explain it very briefly. So in a way, it is a graph of connected assets or things. And we can represent all kinds of interesting things with it. Actually, organizations such as Google, Facebook, Netflix, NASA, a lot of them use it to track all kinds of things, activities, parts within their supply chain, like NASA, for example. And we've been applying it actually in the food space quite a bit, but you can consider it as kind of a global trusted knowledge infrastructure. So it's a place where you can grow this graph and find all kinds of interesting information in it. Essentially with this ability to find or discover something, then to verify, as you, John, put it very nicely at the beginning, verify in terms of a source of information, credentials of the source, credentials or certificates associated with a specific object, maybe be that a food item or a building or a car. And essentially what OriginTrail is infrastructure that enables this for various use cases, but it started in 2013, actually, 10 years ago almost, in food supply chains. And essentially you can consider it as a very large graph of things that point to each other. A product that has been built by a certain company, or some sort of material that has been cultivated at a certain place, a crop that's been grown, a certificate that's been issued to something. All of these are essentially objects in relation to each other, and a graph is a really good way to represent them. That's why the decentralized knowledge graph. Why is it decentralized? Because it's actually completely trusted infrastructure that everybody participates in and no single authority controls. It actually combines the power of blockchains and knowledge graphs together, and you can sort of consider it as a 3-layer system. There's this bottom layer of blockchains, and actually multiple blockchains at that. We really believe in the principle of neutrality and the ability to choose which blockchain you want to use, and therefore OriginTrail has been deployed to multiple blockchains throughout its history. Layer 2 is the decentralized knowledge graph. That's not a blockchain. It's a network that is specifically tailored for the graph operations. And then on top of that, you can build all kinds of applications. And we point to something called knowledge assets here because we really want to explain that data is not just raw data, or not even, I think the parallel of data is the new oil is valid, but like the oil is a bit different than what an actual asset you might consider owning in the digital world might be. So we have knowledge assets as key primitives of OriginTrail, and they're designed to support GS1, W3C, and ISO standards, therefore, so increasing semantics for particular industries. Like I said, the technology is a synergy of 2 layers, and what is really important here is to understand that it's really infrastructure. It's more of like a layer on top of which you build additional applications. And what are those applications? Were some examples I already mentioned. You can see a few of them on the screen. Most relevant for this webinar are obviously food and beverage applications, but we also built applications on top of the decentralized knowledge graph in the pharmaceutical industry, rail industry. Trusted Factory is also a product built with the British Standards Institution that is specifically related to what John mentioned, which is how do you verify the actual producer or the actual company who has been involved in a supply chain through something called supplier compliance audit network. So it's also utilizing OriginTrail to entrust actually 40% of all imports into the US via sharing security audits between large retailers such as Walmart, Target, Home Depot, Costco, and others. So it's a very broadly applicable technology. And in that sense, specifically, if we go into the food industry, there's been many applications of it in many different places. You can see one very example on this screen of one of our poultry partners who is using it to showcase the actual provenance or really the origin and certificates of all of their products within stores in markets. And you can do that for several years already in Slovenia. And there's a multitude of projects that OriginTrail is currently being built upon, one of them being the food safety market that Manos has presented, but also a couple of others, including several other data marketplace initiatives, which particularly OriginTrail is very suited for. There's other applications, like I mentioned, also in the beverage industry. This on the left side, you see an actual product built on top of OriginTrail, which shows what they call from grain to glass, the entire process, as well as all of the information about how a whiskey is made in Ireland in the Church of Oak distillery, and as well as what certificates it has attached. This is also another project that we've been working on in collaboration with the British Standards Institution that is using the OriginTrail DKG. And from the perspective of it's not just interesting from the perspective of food safety, it's also interesting from the perspective of consumer behavior and perception of the product, where the brand is actually built upon the principles of transparency and trust, which is provided through the data that the customers can see in such applications. All of this data, like I said, is verifiable for the source in the DKG, because you're able to actually see who published the data, such as the partners through the FSM platform, as well as for integrity. So you're able to verify that the data that you're seeing is indeed been published in that exact form. So it hasn't changed along the way in the data supply chain, if you might call it like that. So could not be manipulated or transformed without detection. So those are some of the properties of the OriginTrail DKG. And to finish off this discussion, OriginTrail is really an ecosystem. It's not a company. So there's many companies building and generally developers building on top of the technology, as well as multiple projects and standards that it's used within. So it's a system for everyone. It's open source, and it can be applied in various areas within the food supply chain, but also other sectors where discoverability is important, verifiability is important, and ultimately a notion of sharing valuable information as knowledge assets is something that can improve processes. And that's kind of pretty much all over the place. If you look at the basis of what we're building today, even looking at AI, which Manos really well put, it's great. You can predict a lot of things, but you need the data, right? You cannot do it without the data. So it's very important where this data comes from. Is it verifiable or not? And it's important to make it discoverable so we can actually use it. Otherwise, it can exist somewhere, but if it's not discoverable, it cannot be usable. So I'll stop right there. I think I went a bit over. I apologize for that. And I guess I'll take it back to you, John.
Yeah, thank you so much, Branimir. Fantastic. You're certainly addressing and answering a lot of the questions that I had at the start, and around making assets discoverable. You talked about and verifying the credentials. so critically important. I was delighted to hear that you're catering for up to 40% of the imports into the US with those big players, and having that momentum behind the market will also help those suppliers in far off distant countries to be compliant with regulatory requirements in their target markets. But you also talked about combining blockchain and decentralized knowledge graphs, and that 3 layers, which I think is very important. Knowledge assets, designed to support the standards W3C, GS1, and ISO. Fantastic. I'm a big fan of standards, as you know, being a former GS1 guy. So I love to align and recommend to companies and even governments that industry standards is definitely a way to go. And I was also delighted to see the consumer app, which is focusing on my favorite areas of transparency and trust in the food chain. So thank you so much for that, Branimir. We will come back to you and mine into that when we have some questions. But now I'd like to pass over to Diana Sabrian, and Diana is from OneAgrix, and she'll give us a response based on her lens of the market. Diana, over to you.
Thank you very much. So I'll share my screen and take it from there. Okay, so I wanted to say that from what Manos presented, and then over to Branimir, and Branimir, you mentioned about data is a new oil, but this oil is a little bit different, and it's true because when OneAgrix wanted to tackle the halal food supply chain, we often think about, okay, what are the challenges we are facing and who do we partner with? And on your last slide, I saw that, OneAgrix there, with all the numerous partners with OriginTrail, and, for the benefit of the audience here, we are partners with OriginTrail for years now. When we were conceptualizing the marketplace, the ecosystem for the halal sector, we think, who could we best partner with? And obviously with the OriginTrail protocol, like what you said, Branimir, we built our system on top of what, the open source protocol that you have. And so when we think about the halal sector, we look at fragmentation and we look at haphazard data all over the place. And then with the marketplace being fragmented, the incidence of fraud and halal integrity is questionable. And I know there are people in the audience here which I recognize are from the halal sector, and we share the same issues for more than 2 decades now. So when we created this ecosystem, we asked ourselves, okay, so now let's move from physical trade to digital trade. And from there, what are the issues? Obviously, data is the first thing. In a B2B e-commerce environment, how sure are we that the food products are from halal certified manufacturers? How sure are we that it is really what it says in its packaging? And it's not merely just a marketplace that we've created and built over the years, but an ecosystem which what John mentioned, right? It has to be interoperable. It has to be based on standards, based on just one standards. Our CTO here, Kevin Lee, he's amazing. He is formerly from just1 as well. And really what we are trying to do here is to harness data on the OriginTrail protocol, on the TraceLabs system, and then get those data, harness it out into an e-commerce environment for halal, for faith-based sector. Not just halal, it will work also for the kosher sector. So with that, what we see here is not just data from halal certification, it has to be also data harnessing from DNA traceability, which our team calls it true traceability from farm to fork or farm to retail. Now, I know that there are some, John, you always say that, it's not possible to say it farm to fork, but then, we are using that terminology because that's what people identify with here at the layman. Okay, so now with our platform, what we are doing is, and it's wonderful because OriginTrail built a wonderful ecosystem. On our side is a halal ecosystem, and it is wonderful to see collaborative efforts from numerous ecosystems. And in the halal sector, let me communicate this. What we are struggling right now is everyone wanting to build ecosystem in silos. What we want to demonstrate is ecosystems can communicate together. Data can be communicated, of course. There's still work to be done, but then I'm confident with protocols like OriginTrail, with TraceLabs, with companies like Agrano, we are able to collaboratively lower cross-border trade, frictionless trade, like what OriginTrail has mentioned. So now this is the solutions that we have based on the challenges that we face. I don't have to read off my slides. I think everyone could see here. With the food crisis, we see that digital trade is increasing, but there's also a high incidence of fraud. And then there is information asymmetry. So all these challenges would mean that, okay, how can we use technology to solve this? How can we trade better? How can we trade quicker? How can we ensure that food is safe, to this theme on food safety? And this is where you would see for us what we did recently, together with OriginTrail Trace Lab, together with Inexto, one of the, it's the best serialization company in the world. They serialize 500 million per year products. And then also one of our DNA traceability partners, which is a Fortune 500 company. Now, what we did was in December 2022, we are the world's first pioneering and comprehensive pilot to demonstrate the digital trade of halal premium beef from the UK. And I would have to give the credit to this farm from Hill Farm Finance in the UK, Brother Usman. He basically saw that, hey, this is how the future, or no, it's not even the future. He said, this is how trade should be right now, with the food crisis, premium or not. It has to be more transparent. And John, you mentioned transparency. Manos, you mentioned transparency at length as well earlier in the presentation. And this is proof here. These are news. Just so you guys know, that who attended that global launch in Dubai was the food safety senior of Dubai. He attended as well. He was very impressed of what he saw, that what we presented on the table. He scanned that packaging and it appeared on on all our partners interfaces. So it's an API collaboration that was successfully done. Bloomberg reporter was present, so was Zawiya. So we were really excited that the launch went really well. And then of course there were questions of, okay, so the technology is here now, can we scale? And this is where I think later in the Q&A we could say that yes, we are confident we can scale this, but we must be careful that it cannot be totally mainstream first. Let's start with those premium products first, and then work our way into driving down the cost. But I know OriginTrail team has already driven down their cost for adoption. Of course, there are other points, but at OneAgrix, what we're seeing here is this is the entire ecosystem that we offer for faith-based, for halal, best in class. You don't have to vet through, which is reliable or not. We've done it. It's proven. The proof is in the pudding. And now let's harness this data and create a digital trade environment where we can trade faith-based and halal food. And I don't know whether any one of you here realize that it is now beyond $2.5 trillion already for the halal sector. Some reports has already mentioned that it has gone up to 7 trillion in our sector. And if no one is going to build on this data and make it more transparent, who else? So this is where it starts, and I'm excited to bring this further. I hope I didn't take more than 5 minutes.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Diane. I was delighted to hear you talk about fragmented data, because I know when Branimir and the team started off, key core focus was the moving away from silos of data. So that has been a historic strategy for Branimir and the team. But you also talked about the fragmented data can lead to different types of digital fraud and also product fraud. You talked about also on one of your slides around consumer trust, or a lack of consumer trust in the actual credential. Authentic food was what you had on the slide, but it's also in the credentials where people are claiming, for example, USDA organic. I just wrote an article, finished an article today where I reminded people that when you have even a credential like USDA organic, and that's global, it's very difficult to marshal that and to control that worldwide, and also to do that market surveillance. And even today, if you go to the USDA website, they provide a mechanism for consumers to do that. I'm going to call it the manual version of trust verification. But the fact that they have it there is good. A lot of these credential companies do not have any way for a consumer to verify. And they are the authoritative source, and they pass the buck over to the custodian, who's the brand owner. And we don't want, from an integrity perspective, we don't want the brand owner to be telling you or verifying a credential that they didn't assign. We don't want them to be doing that. They're the custodian, not the authoritative source. So in order to get to that higher level of integrity, we need the authoritative source, like what Branimir was talking about, what they've done with the factory scan. But I was also delighted to hear you talk, Diana, around other certifications that are within the your portfolio as well. That's great. And the DNA traceability, again, congratulations on that. You mentioned info asymmetry, information asymmetry, which basically is about, you know, two people, one has more knowledge than the other. And when you have more knowledge than the other party, it's easy to manipulate the conversation or the transaction to your benefit. And that's the cheating that we see going on in industry all over the world. You know, different parties do it for different reasons. And you mentioned something I think is very, very important. That's scalability. And that's maybe one of my first questions as I remind people that the Q&A box is open. So if you do have a question, please pop it into the Q&A box. But let me start on that. Let me first thank all three of you for your introductions and quick briefings. Let's start on that point that Diana ended on around scalability. So I'm going to go to Branimir first. I'm going to ask you first, Branimir, around starting off or setting up these projects, and how do you start the project in the first place? How do you manage the data, and then how do you consider scaling up? And then I'll ask you the same question, Manos. So Branimir, over to you.
Thanks, John. It's quite a broad question, but I'll try to categorize it in a couple of smaller, let's say, groups. Essentially, starting a project always involves obviously understanding what the specific project is about, and then is it relevant for a specific industry, or is it a safety project or traceability project? There's differences to it. Comes down to data in the end, of course, and then these differences are important when it comes to discoverability. So what type of queries you might ask it. For example, if you think of the latest, coolest thing on the internet, ChatGPT is, right, one of the things that everybody's excited about. It's about you asking a chatbot, but essentially asking queries, asking questions. And then for any food safety application, it's those questions. Who certified this? Is the certificate valid? And so on. So knowing these questions is always a really good start for starting a project. And then once you enter the realm of data, which is, let's say, the second group, it is really important to understand several different topics there. One is standardization that we already talked about. So essentially, good data is highly structured, it's well organized, it's labeled properly, and in food systems, that's absolutely essential. That's where GS1 standards particularly help. But some things are not just about food systems. For example, identity is also another important component. How do you know that agrono is really agrono? Or how do you know that some halal certification body is really that body? Well, you need some additional information, and certain W3C standards like decentralized identifiers, which we also, for example, use together with agrono within the FSM project, are also very important. They provide this ability to provide to give you identity in a verifiable way. So standards are one really important aspect of it. And another one, obviously, when it comes to data, is who gets to see the data. So it's privacy. Important for all of the projects that we've been involved so far. The biggest concern, specifically when using or trying to use blockchain technology, was who will be able to access this information, when, how, under which conditions. And that's why over the years, we realized that built into the DKG privacy features, So essentially it has two layers. It has a public knowledge graph, which everybody can query. Think of it as like your Google. You can go and query whatever is publicly on the internet. And then there's a private component to it. So every company is able to own actually their information within their own domain, just like you own your mailbox and I cannot enter it, right? But then also provide access to somebody if they are required to see it. Like, for example, the SCAN project we mentioned, the Customs and Border Protection Agency of the US is able to access certain additional information because they have this right to access these private assets in the knowledge graph. So privacy, standardization, and then finally, when it comes to privacy, it's also important about infrastructure. Is this data all in one place? Can it be in one place? Blockchains are usually actually not the answer. That's why the decentralized knowledge graph, because if you take, for example, public blockchains, everything is completely public, it's replicated everywhere, and some data can just not sit there at all, for example, even personal data. On the other hand, permission blockchains also problematic because, again, somebody's an administrator of this. So once you get to the problem of scalability that you mentioned, once you want to have multiple parties somehow use the same system, it becomes very hard because it gets into different kinds of problems, technical, but also political. Why would, for example, somebody from the US use a Russian blockchain, for example? Probably wouldn't, right? So ideally, we have completely permissionless, completely open systems that anybody can participate in, like the internet. You don't need permission from anybody to use the internet. You just need a connection, a modem, computer, a couple of technical things. But from that moment on, you can join this webinar and listen to a bunch of people speak from anywhere in the world. That's exactly what we need for supply chains, and that's what the decentralized knowledge graph aims to be. It's a layer where all of this information can be shared with additional context and with privacy and standardization in mind. So usually when doing a project, it involves all of these aspects, and then quite often that involves different systems, such as Agronode systems. Agronode gets a lot of valuable information aggregated from the internet. They have a lot of expertise in their field, and then obviously that information is an asset. Actually, it generates a lot of value for Agronode and for the users of Agronode. And where the decentralized knowledge graph helps in that sense is making this information more discoverable. So others can also find that it exists, even if they don't know that it's there, through queries, through questions, such as questions like ChatGPT. Finally, when it comes to scalability, what's important here is that you design a system that can take in a lot of load, but also doesn't take an enormous amount of energy. And that's where it's important to consider what type of particular components you're using, such as blockchains, for example. It makes sense to use specific blockchains for specific things, but also, for example, the decentralized knowledge graph has been designed so it doesn't consume a lot of energy, and it can be used with much less footprint than any other decentralized system of a blockchain type of a sort. So all of these are considerations that are important when building such projects.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Branimir, for breaking that down. I know you're a big brain guy, so you were able to break down that complex question into multiple component parts, and thank you so much for doing that. Manas, I'm going to go over to you for a couple of minutes to respond to that about implementation, especially around your area of AI and predictive, but I want to put a spin on this one for you. I want to put the spin on it as, how can you get the data when there's so many different and sometimes competing resources? But if you look at food safety, it's in everybody's interest, because food safety, we argue that it should be non-competitive. But there's a lot of risk involved for companies if their information is shared. Are there ways around that? And what are the complexities in implementing projects with regard to the data and the privacy of the data? And as Branimir said, who gets to see it?
That's a great question, John. It cuts directly to what the frontier is right now. But yeah, let me say this, based on what Branimir as well, very well outlined. I'm a computer scientist as well, so technical scalability is a very interesting issue, but it's a solvable issue, okay? We analyze the computational demands, so the algorithms we want to run, or how large the data are, how is the velocity of the requests we're expecting, and all this. And we have many ways we can tackle this through high-performance computing, cloud computing, or edge computing, which is very interesting right now, where you offload part of their workload directly where the data is coming from, rather than getting the data back. But at the end of the day, the most interesting questions are the ones that you mentioned, John. So are there, apart from technical scalability, are there counter incentives to getting the data you need to complete traceability? And it's interesting that many times we see examples of achieving this traceability result where the market is niche, or you have some actors that are very fond of fork, that they have access to the complete supply chain themselves. So you have trust as a given. Okay. So, John, you mentioned in your initial presentation root cause analysis, okay, which is very important. Where you would like this complete traceability picture. Of course, there are counter incentives to that. Some companies are reluctant to share. And what is the frontier right now is, can we use technologies like federated AI learning, where you don't need to share the data to the company that is going to train the model. You give the model to the company to be trained there on the local premises, so the data doesn't get out. And what you get back at the end is the end result. So maybe you get the policy recommendations, or you get the root cause analysis for you to use, or you get an aggregated forecasting for future food safety incidents that use the data that come from many different actors in the supply chain, many adjacent food industries, without them having to exchange data among them. So the model gets trained across all these stations, across all these different companies, but they don't need to exchange data. So this is the frontier right now. We have a very interesting European project called EFRA, Extreme Food Risk Analytics, to tackle exactly that. Hope that helps.
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you so much. So I'm going to ask Diana a different question, and then just a choreograph for the audience. I'm going to go to the Q&A section after Diana, and we'll spend 5+ minutes on those questions if we can. And then I'm going to do a closing with each of the panelists, giving them 1 minute each to do their closing comments. So Diana, I want to go over to you. You're an entrepreneur, you're the business person, you're applying the technology, you know, from brilliant companies like Trace Labs, Agrano, and others. What has been your secret sauce in looking at these best of practice partners and pulling all of that together from an interoperability perspective? Can you share your thoughts on that?
That's a very interesting question, John, which is more of a meta philosophy at OneAgrix, right? As a company, how we view technology is how it evolves. Now, we've seen the history on how Kodak they were so stubborn, they didn't want to evolve and they rendered obsolete, right? So at OneAgrix, we knew that our business is not just creating a B2B marketplace. The business going forward is about collaboration. So that's where we told ourselves that it has to be a collaborative effort. It has to be an ecosystem approach. And there's no such thing in our view as one ecosystem. We have to have multiple ecosystems communicating together. Now, this is not saying that it's all kumbaya. Obviously, there's still competitive edge that we need to manage. However, having said that, one of the criteria when we decided who we want to work with is, most importantly, a shared vision for a common good. And if, let's say, we are all going into this as partners just to be the next wealthy person on the planet, a billionaire or something, nope, then that's not how we roll at OneAgrix. So OriginTrail, I've met Ziga in person. I have known Bradamir and Thomas, you know, the founders, the team. They are for humanity. And you can see from their first slide, solving humanity's issues. You see, they talk about, and this is what we want to do, Agrano as well. I've read and followed your work, and all of us are sincere in wanting good for our ecosystems and wanting good in the communities. And so, John, if you ask us what's the criteria. In a non-technical perspective, it is a common good, a shared, aligned vision, and we have not wavered from it from day one. It doesn't matter if a competitor comes next, because we are this one solid ecosystem and team with one shared vision and sincere. That's where we will push further for the next decade. And because our mindset is not one technology cast in stone. I've seen OriginTrail, I've seen companies that we work with in Nextdoor, with ourselves even, going, okay, what's next in technology? Our CTO, our last town hall, we're already talking about, okay, how can we stay ahead for the next 10 years? We're not just sleeping, and resting on our laurels. So those are the secret sauce that we practice here. I'm sure the same as well with the rest.
Wonderful. I'm delighted to hear that, Diana. At McGill, of course, as you know, we have food convergence innovation. And if I can put that in context for the audience today, there's two ways to approach this. You can take the Industry 4.0 approach and say, I have this shiny thing, what can I do with it? And a lot of tech companies will do that. Or you can take what's often called the Society 5.0 approach, where you take a view of the future of humanity, and then you look at the different roles that we as humans play in society. We're a son, we're a daughter, we're a mom, we're a parent, we're a teacher, we're a student, we're a patient. And then you take that future view and you look back and say, what do all of those roles need? What do all of those people need in the future? And I think there's a good balance to be had by looking at it through those two angles. And another small component I'll just mention into that is, how do we get the feedback anonymously, of course, from the health systems to be able to feed that back into the food systems to make sure that we're producing better foods? So it's strangely enough, in a study that was done, led out of Australia across OECD countries, Canada has the highest sodium levels in packaged products, shelf-stable products. So is that a result of our beautiful cultural mosaic in Canada? And what could we do to re-educate consumers to move away from high sodium levels and so on? So I like that approach, Diana, having a purpose in mind, and it seems like there's a good balance with all three companies. So I'm going to go to I'll come back to you for 1 minute closing each, but I'm going to go to the Q&A. Johannes G is asking, interesting, can I learn more about DKG via OriginTrail Academy? I think the answer to that is absolutely yes, right, Branimir?
Yeah,
Yes.
exactly.
Yeah. Johannes is asking also, the trace token track is used for DKG operations and incentivizing protocol behavior, plus is published on the network. What other utilities does it have, and is it intended to be to accrue or capture value? Acquire, I think he probably meant, or capture value.
Suggest to Johannes to check out the official documentation. There's pretty much all of this is explained on the official website. But just to refer to the question briefly, trace is a utility token of the network, and it's used much in the same way as, for example, Ethereum ETH token is used. So when you want to use the decentralized network, you essentially have a certain set of fees to in a way cover for the usage. So you're writing state into the network, and these machines which are persisting state actually get compensated via this utility token. There's more details to it in the docs, but I guess there's very little time, so probably better to go through the rest.
Wonderful. And I think Martina in the back office will also address that question directly. There's an anonymous attendee who's saying, Branimir, who approves identities in the DKG, or is it the Veil Networks Consortium application to the DKG?
So I'm not sure about the second part of the question, but the first part of the question is, the answer is nobody really approves anything. So it's a completely permissionless network. Anybody is able to join the network and publish information in it, including information on their own identity, and then certify that information. So essentially at the protocol level, it's completely permissionless. There's no guardian. Like there's no guardian on the internet in that same way. So that's applied on the layers above. And if you've seen my presentation, that will be on the topmost layer. on the application layer.
Gotcha. This question from Jean Ruda, I'm going to ask Diana, have you tried food safety traceability? Have you tied food safety traceability and DKG to the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals and ESG impact reporting in general? So Diana, do you want to address that based on what you have done?
Yes, so what the whole purpose for us to introduce food safety, food traceability, and to use the DKG is to then collate data and then match it against the metrics that is aligned to numerous UN SDGs. And a few that we do is to also, for example, in cocoa trade, what we hope as we onboard more farmers in the cocoa sector is to then track, are these cocoa sustainably sourced? Now, we shouldn't be relying on already existing certification bodies that are saying that it is, without using that actual word, trading fairly in the market, but then by implementing certain measures of traceability, we'll be able to then ascertain that. So that's one. Secondly, also we look at the she empowerment. We look at how we create opportunities or empower opportunities for female farmers across the world. There are millions of farmers across the world, and many of them are under poverty line. So these are the mission-based, non-profiting things that we do at OneAgrix. But then, yes, we are constantly aligning ourselves with the UN SDGs.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. So Manos, your 1 minute closing. Over to you.
Thanks, John. Let me just say, very interesting webinar, very nice questions. Very quickly, let me say that I think that we have done, and I mean collectively, as businesses, as universities, as research centers, we have done all we could with public data. Okay, we have crawled it, we have analyzed it, we have done forecasting with it. The new frontier and where the true oil is private data. Okay, and the idea here is how can we get the knowledge without having to share the data, without having to open the wormhole of legal liabilities and things like that. And can we use interesting technologies like federated AI learning to be the central technical solution around which such nice collaborative intelligence networks can be built.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Manos. Branimir, 1 minute.
Thanks, John. I think Manos gave a really good future view, and it's really about the data that hasn't been already in the public place. And when you, for example, if it were, you could already ask ChatGPT about where the whiskey you bought comes from. It doesn't know it because the data is not available online, even though it indexed the entire internet. Therefore, it's absolutely true. And it's a huge frontier. We think that the public data is just the tip of the iceberg. And with having the ability to index all of it in some verifiable way, and then use tools like edge computing, like Manos mentioned, or actual something called zero knowledge proofs, that where you can actually show that something is true, even though you don't see the entire data. It's a completely separate topic, but it's very interesting, and this gives a lot of potential. And we're actually actively exploring those through the Metcalfe and Turing phase of OriginTrail roadmap. So I encourage everybody who's interested in looking at the crossroad of these different technologies to explore our website and get in touch with the OriginTrail community. It's open to everyone.
Thank you so much, Branimir. Diana, we have 50 seconds left. Over to you.
Okay, so I'll be very quick. Never underestimate how important food safety is. It's a matter of food security, it's a matter of national security, and faith-based sectors as well. Easily 1/4 of the world's population, even more with faith-based food supply chain. Also, don't underestimate that, because then who are going to feed safe food around the world for this, for this demographic. So never underestimate, again, food safety, and it's a matter of food security and national security. So I do hope if there are governments listening right now to take note that your food security plan has to include a cohesive plan of food safety and your faith-based communities as well.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Manos, Branimir, Diana, thank you all so much for your contributions, your excellent contributions to the webinar. And to everyone who dialed in today to listen to the webinar, thank you all so much. And wherever you are, have a great day, have a great evening, have a great morning, and we'll chat to you again soon on behalf of the Trace Alliance Network. Thank you all, and we'll close now.